I'm Rob Skinner, and this is the Rob Skinner Podcast. In this episode, I talked to Fadi Alhinn, a disciple born in Jordan and now living in San Diego, California. He talks about what it's like growing up Christian in the Middle East, how he moved 20 times before the age of 20, strengths and weaknesses of both U.S. and Middle Eastern churches, how he lost his dad at the age of 17, and what it was like moving to the States and starting over. All this and more on the Rob Skinner Podcast. Welcome back to the Rob Skinner Podcast. My goal is to inspire you to live a no-regrets life, make this life count, and multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. Thanks for listening to the Rob Skinner Podcast. If you feel like you're benefiting from the program, I'd like to ask you to support it with a gift. Your support enables me to multiply disciples, leaders, and churches, and inspire others to do the same through this podcast. All you need to do is go to the show notes, and there's a link to support the program. Thank you so much. Fadi, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. Super grateful.
I know. We saw each other in San Diego at a recent Pacific Southwest leaders meeting, and it was great to see you. And we've talked a little bit over the years, different times, different conferences, but it's really nice to have you on the program and to be able to talk. Thank you for sharing your story today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
How did you become a Christian?
So I grew up in the Middle East. Born, raised, and converted in Jordan. And I started studying the Bible in the teen ministry. Actually, when the teen leader, Fadi, asked me to study, he didn't ask me to study the Bible. He just picked me up one day from my home, and we went out. And we got food, and he started sharing scriptures and talking, and then dropped me off. And then he said, all right, I'll pick you same time next week. And then he did that. Same thing, took me out. We played actually pool and opened some scriptures, shared his life, and dropped me off. Same thing, pick you up next week. He did that maybe like 4 times. And then my cousin, who was studying the Bible, came up to me. He was like, hey, how do you feel about studying the Bible? And I was like, studying the Bible? No, I'm not studying the Bible. And he was like, no, wait, I was told you are. And I went back to my team leader. I was like, hey, am I studying the Bible? He's like, yeah, you've been studying the Bible. And really, that's how it really started. It was very organic. And then when I realized I was actually studying the Bible, I thought, oh, cool. It'll just be everything I already know, everything that I've studied, everything, as a kingdom kid, a preacher's kid as well. And it was all the way to the cross that really just changed my perspective. It just opened my eyes to a whole new level that I even just growing up in the church didn't realize. And I knew then, like, I'm going to take this seriously. So that's how I studied the Bible, got baptized.
Wow. Okay. So you're raised in Jordan. How was the church planted there?
Yeah, I love that story. I think it's a very spirit story. But my uncle moved to the U.S., moved to San Diego in 1982 on a student visa. We had no church back home and no church in Jordan. And he was sitting in class, and there was a disciple there, and that disciple decided, I'm going to sit next to someone new each class and invite him to Bible talk. And when he sat next to my uncle, he learned that he's Middle Eastern, and he thought, oh, man, I don't know if he'd be open, and he did not share with him. And then my uncle was walking on campus when another guy shared with him, and he went to Bible talk. And he saw his friend from class, and he was like, why didn't you invite me? I was waiting for you. But my uncle studied, got baptized. And then after college, his visa was ending, and so he needed to go back home. And the church was worried for him to go back home. They didn't want him to go back home. He was a young Christian. There was no church in the Middle East or in Jordan at that time. And so they were fasting and praying, doing everything they can to not send him home. But, the visa expired, nothing worked, and he ended up going back in 84. And he tried to stay in touch with the churches in the U.S., but there was no social media. There's no way to get a hold of them. And for 2 years, he tried to study the Bible with his family, but they had no interest. So he was the only disciple in Jordan for 2 years. And he just stayed faithful. I think that's incredible. And then finally, third year, his family saw the difference in his life, and my aunt Rula got baptized, and then my dad got baptized. And so the church went from 1 to 3 disciples, and they had services in the living room. And actually, the biggest persecutor of the church was my grandpa. And every Sunday, he would persecute them, and then they would relocate church from the living room all the way to the bedroom. And so that was the first move the church had. But my dad went to college.
They were scattered from the living room to the bedroom.
Yeah, they were scattered. But my dad went to college, and he started campus ministry and started to convert his friends. And this is where the Spirit just starts to take over. In 1987, 1987, that's when Boston sends a mission team to Jordan, not knowing that we have disciples. And one of the members of the mission team calls her cousin, and goes, "Hey, we're coming. I'm part of a mission team. We're part of the International Church of Christ, and we'd like to plant a church. We would love for you to come and be part of our service." And that cousin was my dad's best friend, who my dad converted.
Oh my gosh!
And he goes, "I'm already part of a Church of Christ. Why don't you come to our service?" He tells my dad, and my dad's like, "Oh, there's a lot of Churches of Christ out there. We're not the same fellowship. Just forget about it." She calls again. She's like, "No, we'd love to meet." They meet, and they study the Bible with each other, and it's the same studies. And then my uncle goes, "Wait, do you know this person?" It's like, "Yes, I know this person. You know this person?" And we're the same, church. It's just a Spirit-led moment. And the Boston team sent a mission team, but God has already been working and moving, and the Spirit orchestrated this whole thing. I think it's a great Spirit-led story.
That is amazing. And that team was led by Bob and Lori Tranchel, is that right?
Yes.
I mean, what are the odds? I mean, this is Amman, Jordan.
Yeah.
Okay. Got to be at least 1 million people in that city, I would guess.
Yeah, I think at that time there's about 3 million.
3 million. Okay. Needle in a haystack. That's incredible.
Yes.
I just wonder what it must have been like. Now, your uncle's name, what is his name?
Simon.
Simon. Okay. Wow. I mean, that's just incredible. You stayed faithful all during that time.
It is.
Okay.
And I think that's the thing too. Like, a lot of times we try to do things, but the Spirit is always working. Even the church was fasting for him not to go, and just thinking that's the best thing. Disciples trying to keep him, but I think the Spirit is always working different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. It was like he was the forerunner before that mission planting.
Right.
Okay, so what was it like growing up as a disciple of Christ in the Middle East?
Yeah, I have to say, growing up mostly in Jordan, I didn't face the same persecution a lot of people, many Christians in the Middle East face. But I think there's definitely a difference growing up over there as a Christian than it is anywhere in the world. For me, as a kingdom kid and a minister's kid, I moved a lot. I lived different places. By the time I was 20 years old, I moved 20 different times.
Wow.
Because my parents were just moving different countries, different places, planting churches, helping churches grow. But I loved the church. I grew up if I grew up moving this much outside of the church, I would be a completely different person. And so I'm super grateful. I'm super grateful for the church. The thing about the Middle East, the religion is a big part of your identity, whether you're Christian or Muslim. It's like who you are. And I remember when I first got my ID, it was just kind of this like a shock where our ID there's a part, where it says date of birth or all that information. There's a part where it says your religion on the ID. So if you're a Muslim, there's no option. There's no atheist, or it's just either Muslim or Christian. And I remember when I got my ID at first, he didn't even ask me. He said Muslim, and then he stopped, looked at me, said, "Are you Christian or Muslim?" I said, "I'm Christian." And he wrote it down, changed it to Christian. So religion is a big part of just your identity. You're either a Muslim or Christian, and that's why a lot of people are willing to die, because it's just who they are. It's who they are as Christians. And so that's how I felt growing up. I felt deeply my Christianity, and there was nowhere else to go. I'm a Christian. I have my church. It's my family. And so it was wrapped up in my identity a lot. And it's especially hearing a lot of things going on, a lot of persecution outside of Jordan, really solidified that this is who I am. And in my school, most of the time growing up, I was the only kid with a Christian background. And they would, everyone else was Muslim, and they would have Muslim, like a Muslim class, and teach Islam, and they would dismiss me for that period. And so I would sit in a principal's office waiting for them to be done. And when I come back, I always felt out of place, and then sometimes they would tell me, yeah, we were talking about Christianity versus Islam. And I just felt out of place always. Wow. And I remember, and Islam is like knitted in the fabric of society. And so Arabic class, we would learn the Quran, learn Arabic through the Quran. But I remember my physics teacher in physics class, out of nowhere, just talking about why he's Muslim and not Christian. And his main argument, he just stopped his physics class, his science class, and he's just talking about why Christianity is wrong. And specifically talking to me in front of my class. And I remember his main argument was that Muhammad is the only prophet that said he's going to be the last prophet, and that the Bible actually mentions that Muhammad's going to come. And I was like, well, why don't you show me? Like, show it to me. And he's like, no, it's your Bible. You need to know where it is. And I was so upset. But I think I came back the next day, and he opened up the argument again. And then I said, you know what? Actually, Jesus does mention it. He says that there will come false prophets, and your prophet was a false prophet.
Ooh.
And I remember he was so upset and so angry.
Oh my gosh.
And my heart was just beating. Like, I was just thinking about, just my heart was beating. But I think that's what it is. Like, I felt so deeply part of my identity. And it was a shock when I studied the Bible and realized, I'm not a Christian. Like, Christianity is something else deeper than just an identity that I just kind of say, but it's a life that I live. And so that's really just how just a snippet of how I grew up and how it shapes my worldview and my view of Christianity.
Okay, for those of us in the West or different countries, the language you grew up with is Arabic. Is that what the language you spoke at home?
Yes.
Okay. Is it a standard Arabic spoken across the Middle East, or is it a dialect?
Yeah, it has a dialect.
Okay, so you can tell.
But we understand, yeah.
So if you're speaking to someone from, let's say, Saudi Arabia, you'll understand them? The vocabulary is pretty much the same?
Yeah, I would understand them. There would be certain things that would be difficult to understand, but yeah, pretty much everything.
Okay. Do you speak any other languages besides Arabic and English?
No, Arabic and English is my main language. I studied German for a little bit, but lost that.
Okay, how did you learn English so that you speak so fluently? You don't speak with an accent?
Yeah, I grew up going to an international school. So in schools, they teach English at a young age. I would say it's kind of big language um, that you learn from in school. And so growing up, I learned English uh, like early on.
Okay. Okay. Great. So something you picked up early. Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's so hard to imagine the difference. I mean, growing up in Jordan, can you tell me a little bit about the political climate, the government? Was it relatively stable growing up? Was there a lot of upheaval, war? Talk a little bit about that.
No, absolutely. Jordan has always been relatively stable. I think politically, the U.S. supports Jordan heavily because of its just location in the Middle East. It's close to Israel, um, Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, and so I think it has a huge backing from the U.S. to keep it relatively safe and stable. And so I've never really experienced war, but I think that's the beauty of the kingdom, though. You get to travel, and we have all kinds of conferences, and I get to hear the stories of disciples firsthand, and be able to go to Lebanon and see civil war, and go to Egypt and see these different things in the faith of disciples that build me up, and just to be part of that area of the world. I think it translates to that.
You moved 20 times growing up. Like, was that just within the country, or did you move to other countries as well?
Yeah, most of it was within Jordan, but I think it was also in different countries: Lebanon, Syria, and Egypt. So these are the four countries that I kept moving around, and sometimes it would be six months at a time. We'd be in one area and then move, and sometimes it would be because of political reasons, where we'd be in Syria and then have to go back to Jordan and then go back, and so it would be a lot of that.
Were the church Did the churches feel similar? Was there a similar vibe in each different church that you went to, or was it really dramatically different depending on the country you're in?
I think each church has its own culture, and each country has its own culture. So I'd say, like Jordan, they're more stoic and less emotional, and so that translates in their walk with God. They're less they're more kind of real and scripture word based. And Egypt can lend itself to be more kind of spirit led and invested and love the word of God. And so each culture has difference, but I think my home is Jordan, so my family's in Jordan. My cousins, most of them are disciples, and so that was a beautiful thing growing up in the church, because it felt like family. Other churches were definitely family. I think it grew into that, and I definitely felt family. Especially moved a lot, and there's so many people that took good care of me and loved me and nurtured me through the years to being a disciple.
I did an interview a while back with Mufid and Jesse. Did you ever get to see those guys?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
They're like my uncle and my aunt.
They're a great, amazing couple.
Yeah.
Now, with all the turbulence recently with the war in Gaza, it just makes me wonder, okay, like what's the relationship like between the churches in Israel and the churches in the I'd say Muslim dominant countries?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very like the church wise, because a lot of Arab nationality nationalities, they cannot go to Israel. It's very difficult for them to go to Israel, and so we usually have a really hard time staying in touch and in contact with the churches in Israel, um, because of the political scene. And so it's usually, in the past, it's always American passport holders are able to be in Israel. My parents tried so many times to go to Israel, but they've always been rejected at the border.
Got it.
And so it's always been difficult as a church relation to keep and maintain that because of just the political situation.
Mm. I remember I went there on a teaching tour probably 20 years ago, and I went into the wrong line at the security checkpoint. This is before 9/11 even happened. And I mean,
Yeah.
they pulled me out of that line. Wasn't paying attention, and they did a strip search. I mean, they questioned me. I was like, I was wondering if I was going to get out of the country. I
Wow.
thought just was not used to that at all. I was like, wow, okay,
Yeah.
I'm definitely in a different country here. Okay. So that's your growing up. You lost your father in a car accident. And
Yes.
can you describe what happened and where you were at the time?
Yeah. So he passed away 2013. He was, I was in Jordan. My dad was in Lebanon at a leaders conference. Um, it was supposed to be a weekend conference, and he was supposed to come back on Sunday. And coming down from the conference, it was heavy rain, hydroplaned, and he crashed on the side of a mountain wall, and it was an instant um, passing. My mom was in the car, and then my uncle and aunt, who are also on staff, were also in the car. They were all three were survived. They were injured, but my dad it hit the car crashed on his side, and he took most of the crash. And I remember I was in Jordan on Sunday. Our services are in the evening, so I was getting ready for church, and Sunday noon, I was getting ready for church, and my discipler calls me, and he goes, "Hey, I'm coming over. Don't open social media. Don't open the news," because it was a national news that four Jordanians crashed and one passed away. He's like, "Don't open anything. Don't open social media," because at that point, disciples were posting and and they heard from the news, and so my discipler came, pulled me aside. And I remember he was like, "Hey, your parents got in a car crash, and they're not doing well. Let's pray." And I prayed. And you hear, my dad got in a car accident. You think, okay, maybe they're hurt, but they're okay. But then after the prayer, he told me he passed, and I remember it just like it was not real because my parents went to conferences, left, and came back so often, and he was supposed to come that day. He was supposed to be at service, and I just remember just being so like just shocked. And then my brother walks in. He was 6 years old at the time, or 5. He was 5 years old, and he was singing, "My dad's coming home tonight." And I remember just looking at him. Just it was just such a surreal moment. It was not real, and I was worried about my mom, and my mom was in the hospital, and it took her like 5 days to get well, to get out of the hospital and come back. And so I was taking care of my siblings. But it was such a surreal moment. It was a life changing, one of the hardest things that I definitely went through. I was 17, just a freshman in college. Life is already different. I'm trying to navigate college and adulthood, and it just came out of nowhere. But I remember I still went to church that day, and we all met and we all prayed. We cried together. We had communion with each other, and it was just we didn't even have a sermon. We just had communion, and we prayed and we cried, and but I just remember the importance of church. Like I knew that I where else would I be? I wanted to go to church with my disciples and with my friends and family, and so that was the day my dad passed.
How, how do you, did you navigate that? Like in your relationship with God, here's your dad, he's a spiritual hero, and, obviously an amazing person. And how did you just kind of account for that in your relationship with God? How'd you get past that, or how'd you work through that, spiritually speaking?
Yeah. I think the first thing that comes to my mind, I as the oldest, I have two siblings. I'm the oldest. In that Middle Eastern culture, I just felt an immense responsibility to take care of my family. Like that was really the first thing that was like, okay, now I gotta step up and be the man of the house and take care of my family. It's kind of like a worldly sorrow in a sense of all right, now I gotta take care of everything and I gotta do it all and I gotta be the man. I have to, and I put so much pressure on myself. I remember definitely feeling like after my prayer, thinking, why did I even pray? Like, what was the point of praying that my dad would be okay if he was already dead? And and you know, I definitely had a lot of doubts. I had a lot of questions, like why, what's going to happen now? Why did this happen to my dad? Why wouldn't he stop it? I mean, these are all normal questions that I felt. But I think the biggest thing, as time went by, I realized God has been taking care of me and my family in ways that I didn't even think about. One of the biggest examples is, so my mind, I'm like, okay, I gotta take care of my brother. I gotta figure out a way to tell him. I gotta be the man of the house. I gotta take care of them. And I waited till my mom came back home to tell him. And we told him, and it was very emotional, and he was crying. And he was 5; he didn't understand everything. But his teachers a week later came to our house and got him toys, and we were talking. And one of his teachers said, "You know what's interesting? Ferris in school said I had a dream that my dad didn't come back home." And looking back, I was thinking about how he was singing that song, right? Like, Dad's coming home, Dad's coming home. It was out of nervousness that he's not coming home and out of worry. But I remember stuff like that where I just felt like, wow, God has been taking care of my brother more than I could ever take care of my brother. And he was already preparing him and taking care of my family before I could take care of my family. I remember waiting for my mom to come from the airport, and just an immense pressure of like, I don't even know how she's going to walk through the door and what she's going to look like or how she's going to be feeling. Like the first time my mom comes through the door from a conference without my dad. And I was gearing up like, all right, I got to be the man. I got to be the one that, helps her and supports the family. And I remember she walked in with just incredible grace and strength. She walked in, she hugged us, kissed us. And I felt like I was able to breathe again because I just felt like I needed to support. I needed to be this guy that holds it all together. And I just felt like time and time again where God was just taking care of me and my family and the people around me. And I didn't have to carry all that. And so I just felt like I experienced God in a different way that I've never experienced God. And there was definitely moments where I had doubts. I felt stuck in my Christian walk. I felt stagnant, but I definitely felt God's presence and help in so many different areas that I've never experienced before. And that kept me close. That kept me holding on to God. I knew I wanted to be a disciple. It was just a question of what kind of disciple will I choose to be. And I think God just helped me through it in so many different ways.
Right. Well, I mean, you could have become bitter. You could have just walked away and said, why would God do this to me? Clearly, that hasn't happened. What happened in the aftermath? That's, I guess, 11 years ago. it just seems like yesterday. It's crazy. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember hearing about it and just being shocked, but the time has gone back quickly. What's happened since that time? There you are, your mom's there, your dad's gone. What happened?
Yeah. So when my dad passed, Mike Rock was involved in helping in the Middle East. Mike Rock, lead evangelist at the time in a region, in LA. And he reached out to me the year my dad passed, and he said, "Hey, why don't you come to the U.S. and we can support you, we can help you." And I felt like, man, I just need to take care of my family. But 2 years later, after my dad passed away, I finished 2 years of college, and I just felt numb. I felt stagnant. I felt like dad's death really affected my spirit. I just felt like there's no more purpose or meaning.
Right.
And that life, doesn't count. Like, this is just meaningless. What am I going to do with my life? And I just didn't want to do anything. I mean, and in some sense, I also felt like I was living in my dad's shadow because the church is small, and I just wanted to do more than I was doing. And I felt like I can do more than what I was able to do. And I felt restricted because in the Middle East, you can't really convert. You can't really share your faith. In some parts, it's illegal. So I just felt restricted in college, and I just wanted to do something. And so Mike Rock actually reached out to me again 2 years later, and he said, "Why don't you come to LA and we'll support, we'll help whatever we can." And so I got my student visa. I bought one-way ticket and landed at LAX, and it was hard. It was difficult. But I would say this, the first 5 years. So my dad passed away 2013. The first 5 years, I just felt like I had no control over my life. Like, every decision I made was a decision I had to make because my dad passed. Like, I felt like I was still trying to figure out my life. And, I had choices to make, but these choices I had to make because my dad passed away. And I felt like I was still trying to get ahead of just kind of figure out my life. And about 5 years later is when I finally felt like, okay, I'm walking on solid ground again. And so grief just takes time. And there's definitely still times where I look back and I just can't believe, or times I look at my life right now and moments where I just feel like, that waves of emotion kind of hits, whether it's my daughter's birth or marriage was a big one. And so a lot has happened, but I would say the move to LA, I knew I needed that. And I took that step because I needed to change. I knew I needed a different path. I knew I needed to do something. I didn't want to stay in this numb, spiritual, stagnant life. I needed to take a step of faith.
Wow. Okay. So you came to Los Angeles, and then you continued. You went to school. You graduated from college here in the States.
Yeah. So moved to LA also solidified that God was absolutely, just felt God's presence. Like I said, I landed in LAX. I didn't even know who was going to pick me up. I grabbed my bag and I connected to the internet, to the airport Wi-Fi, and I get a random phone call and I pick it up, and it's Steve Lounsbury. And he's like, "Hey, I'm on my way, pick you up. Sorry we're late." He picked me up, and he picks me up and he goes, "Hey, are you hungry? What do you want to eat?" And I go, "Man, I don't know. I heard In-N-Out is pretty good." And his son was in the car, and he's like, "Hey, you will do great." And we got In-N-Out, but I didn't even know whose house I was gonna stay in. Like, I had no, it was just a step of faith. Like, God's gonna take care of it. The church is gonna take care of it, and the disciples, it's our family. And I remember they drove me to a disciples' home, the Alice's, and they said, "This is where you're going to be staying." Knocked on the door. They opened the door, and they just welcomed me like a long lost son.
Wow.
And I stayed with them for 2 years.
Wow.
And they didn't ask me to pay a penny. And I went to a community college, and I paid international tuition. Was a lot. It was like 4 times the regular tuition. But I had to work. I got 3 jobs, and to be able to keep my tuition, pay my tuition, I led Bible talk at that campus, and God, made it grow, and it was a great time. Went to community college, went to a 4 year, and God really, just God was there. God was, disciples donated a car for me to be able to go to school. Um, it was definitely hard. There's definitely times where I was like, why am I here? Like, I was doing well back home. I was comfortable back home.
Right.
And I actually had to redo 2 years of college because my units didn't transfer over.
Oh, man.
So I had to redo 2 years of college. But I I felt like I grew in my faith so much. I would do that move again and again and again. Because in a lot of ways, I am what I am because of these hardships and because of these different things. But God took care of it. There's so much like that. God just paved the way that I would have never planned. Stuart Maines led the campus ministry, and we grew so much in our relationship. And his dad passed away while I was there too, and we just related to each other in so many levels. And that I felt God put me in this situation. He put Stuart in the same region to just for me, for him, I just felt God was just taking care of me. But I definitely needed to take that step of faith into the unknown to just realize like, wow, no, God has my back. And just I need to surrender. I need to trust him in these moments.
Now, what was your mom doing at the time?
So my mom stayed on staff.
Okay.
My mom stayed on staff. And then, so my dad passed away 2013, stayed on staff, and then she moved to the U.S. 2018, January 2018. And so I was in the U.S. for 2 years without my family, and then she moved, and now she's on staff as well in the singles ministry, leading the singles ministry in the Inland Empire in LA.
Okay. And so did you go to school at UC Riverside or UCLA?
I went to community college and then went to Cal State San Bernardino.
Okay, Cal State San Bernardino. Okay, and you were there with Stuart. What a great guy! I mean, just amazing. That's crazy because his father died. I think it's 2017. Stuart,
yes.
Kevin Maines. Just oh my gosh, another tragedy. Okay, let's just talk a little bit about the cultural difference. I mean, you're coming from Jordan. You're going. You drop into LA. I mean, when you talk about the craziest culture on the planet, it couldn't be more loosey-goosey, crazy than than Los Angeles. What were your impressions coming in there from the environment that you'd grown up in?
Yeah, I mean, so Inland Empire, the reason Inland Empire is east, like way east, inland of LA. So it's a little further from the craziness of LA. So I was grateful that I landed there, kind of the suburban area of LA. But yeah, there's definitely like different culture shocks, whether it's in the church or outside the church. I think for me, I definitely had a thicker accent then. Had to learn the humor, learn the be really out of myself to make friends because it's just a different environment. There's definitely a lot of things that was kind of a culture shock when it comes to just the way people perceive, I think, family. Middle East is a very collective culture, and so it's all about community. It's all about friends. In the U.S., it is individualistic, And so the way people view church, the way people view discipleship, view family can feel a little different. Like I said, Jordan, I just felt like that's my identity. There's no way I could turn my back on God. There's just no way I could leave the church. But in the US, it can be a different mindset, individualistic mindset of we got options. I can be this type of Christian. I can be this type of Christian. I can be, this type of father. I can be this type of father, or I can be this type of friend, or this type, but it was kind of like how opened my eyes, how just there's options. There are different ways that you can live.
Right.
And I just felt like, why would we choose other things? This is the way to do it. This is the best way you can do it. And, like I said, my dad passed away, and my first initiation, my initial thought was, I want to be at church with my family. Like, where would I go? But I realized a lot of people, if something happened, that's not their first, I want to be home, or I don't want to be at church. But that's what my thought was. I want to be at, like, where else would I go? Like, what else would I do? And I think that's part of the shock of, like, I just love I love the church. I love God. I don't see myself doing anything else. And so that's kind of the shock that I felt of the culture shock in different cultures.
That's interesting. How did you meet your wife?
So we met her in the campus ministry in LA. Actually, we met back in 2012 after San Antonio Summit in San Diego. She's originally from San Diego. My dad, we went to San Diego. He preached, and I met her there as a teen. Never really thought anything about it. And then, fast forward 3 years later, I moved to LA, and my first college Devo was a Sisters Encouragement Night. And so it was my first devotional. It was my first Devo at a campus ministry event in LA. I come early. I'm making garlic bread, and she walks in, and I recognized her from social media. And I was like, oh, it's a person I recognize. I was thinking, like, who can I be friends with, who I can talk to? And she walks in. I go, oh, I recognize her. Maybe we can be friends. And I remember she walked in, blue dress, and we became friends. We became friends, for a year. I was broke because I was only thinking about paying that international tuition, 3 jobs. I was not even thinking about dating at all. I mean, I just was thinking about my mom moving to the U.S., trying to help her move. I took her on one date because I had, didn't have money to take sisters on dates, but she was patient, and I'm grateful. I'm surprised she waited for me that long. But finally got a stable job, asked her to be my girlfriend, and dated for 3 years before we got married.
Wow. When did you get married?
We got married 2020, right before the pandemic. And so, yes.
Well, that's nice. You guys could stay inside and have a long honeymoon there during the pandemic.
Exactly.
Quarantine together.
Quarantine honeymoon, exactly.
I know some other people like Brian and Abby Mackey that got married right during COVID. It had its benefits, especially if you're just getting married at that time. Solidify your relationship. Okay, and what's her name?
Miranda.
Okay, what's her background? She's not Middle Eastern, I take it.
She's half white, half Puerto Rican.
Okay, so she speaks Spanish?
She speaks Spanish, yes, fluent.
Okay. Did you ever imagine growing up that you would marry a non-Middle Eastern or non-Jordanian?
I did. I thought it would be a possibility. I like I said, I went to international school. So in school, we had all kinds of different backgrounds.
Got it.
European, Asians. So I did think I could end up with an international I had no problem with that.
So that was not a hurdle. That wasn't any kind of an issue for you or your
No,
family.
not no, not my family at least, but I know a lot of Middle Eastern families that do care.
Okay. And what about, do you have any kids?
Yeah, we just have our first daughter. Her birthday, actually, her first birthday will be this Saturday,
Oh,
June 1st.
great. And what's her name?
Luna.
Luna?
Luna.
Oh,
Yep.
what a pretty name. That's great. Okay. So what are you doing now? What are you doing for work right now?
So right now, my wife and I moved to San Diego in 2021. Um, and right now we lead the youth and family as a congregational youth and family in San Diego.
Okay. When did you go into the ministry, the professional ministry?
So I went in the ministry like 2018. We went to full-time ministry. My wife was a teacher. She was a teacher first. She taught for 2.5 years before she went into the ministry. Um, but yeah, that's when I went. First, we went in the youth and family, and then went to the campus, and now we're back in the youth and family.
Okay. Like, have you always wanted to go into the ministry? Like, how did you, like, why'd you choose ministry? You could do a lot of different things. I'm sure you probably graduated college around 2018. I'm guessing, or
Yeah, because I had to redo 2 years. I actually graduated 2019.
okay, so it took you a little while. Why ministry?
I think part of me, the way I view it is, I'm even back home. I am in the ministry. Like I'm always in the ministry. Um, it's just a matter of if you're in the ministry or you're in the full time ministry.
Right.
Um, and so I'm in my head. I'm always in the ministry, and I knew if I moved to the U.S., that I would end up in the full time ministry. Like that was part of me counting the cost of if I want to go to the U.S. is because I knew my heart is just to study the Bible with people, is to help people, is to preach the gospel. And I knew that the U.S. is heavy on training, heavy on kind of bringing people into the full time ministry. So I knew if I moved to the U.S., I'm most likely going to end up being in the full time ministry. And so I think it was a. I always knew that it was a. I could always end up in the full time ministry. Um, Ultimately, I just love preaching the gospel. I just want people to know God. I want people to study the Word of God. I want to bring as many people with me into heaven. Um, and I think the best way to do it, you can do that while having a job, but I think the best way to do it is be in the full time ministry, devote my life for that. And so that's kind of why I went to full time ministry. Is just wanting to teach and preach the gospel.
But you must be getting phone calls from Jordan, from family, friends, and hey, you're Middle Eastern, you're Jordanian. When are you coming back? What are you doing in San Diego? I mean,
Right.
You got to wait for heaven. You can't live in heaven on earth here. You got to.
Right.
What are your plans for the future? I guess I'd ask.
Yeah. People ask that all the time. Like, what's your plans? Are you going to go back? And what do you want to do right now? Ultimately, I just want to grow the kingdom and wherever God puts me. And personally, I feel like I can live anywhere. If I need to go back home, I can go back home. If I need to go somewhere else, I can go somewhere else. Right now, I just want, being in the youth and family, I want teens to grow up to love and experience God the same way I have. And a lot of ministers my age want to go to different places and want to go overseas and do things outside their comfort. I feel like I'm currently doing that. I've done that, moved to the US at 19. I view myself the way I view my full-time ministry and where I'm at is I'm a missionary. I'm a foreign missionary.
That's right.
In the United States.
Right.
I'm a missionary in the US, and And I can definitely go back home, and I can definitely help back home and can be absolutely helpful. But in many ways, I think being a disciple and a Christian in the US can at times be harder than being in the Middle East.
How do you mean?
I mean that in a way because what I said when I first moved here, there was all these options, these different versions of Christianity, these options of way of life. There's so many distractions, and and back home, there's only one. We know the truth. There's nothing else to hold on to because everything is so fragile. Economy is fragile. Politics is fragile. We're not promised tomorrow. Today is peace. Tomorrow might not be peaceful. And so there's not much to hold on to except for God. And if something goes bad, we're holding on to God. In the US, it feels like we can be very distracted, and people can be very distracted.
Right.
We can hold on to things other than God. We can be very comfortable. And so I just want to And so that's what I mean, that it can be difficult being a disciple here, being a focused disciple. And we have a lot of disciples. I mean, they've done incredible things, been on mission teams, done amazing things, but then it's very easy to come back and say, all right, now it's time for me to settle. And now it's time for me to just live a comfortable life. And I've done the crazy. Now it's time for me to settle down.
Right.
And I think I just want to help bring people back to God, help people focus back, bring the focus back on God, because it can be very, very easy to be a Christian here that's not focused, that's not relying on God.
Wow. Okay. So it is cool that you're a foreign missionary in the U.S. I mean, you're kind of like a reverse missionary. Coming here is missionary work for you. That's awesome. Being able to have the benefit of living in two different cultures. When you think about the churches here in the States and the churches in Jordan and the Middle East, if you could change one thing if you could transplant something from the States and take it back to the Middle East to improve the churches there, what would it be? And in the opposite way, what would you like to see from the Middle East brought into the U.S. churches that you think would benefit the churches here in the States?
Yeah. I would say I would love to see the one thing I would take from the U.S. to the Middle East is probably the heart in Jordan, at least specifically. I think because it can be illegal and it's hard to convert, and there's a lot of, in the Bible says there's a lot of layers to work through. And if you're on campus, you're kind of limited in what you're able to do and what you're not able to do. But I think over the years, I think it can be very easy in the Middle East to go, okay, well, this is the way it is. And so we're just going to stay in our lane and do what we do. And so one thing I'd love to take from the U.S. and bring it there is probably a little bit of that campus ministry, Bible talk on campus, share your faith, even though if it's with a Muslim or someone outside of the Christian background, and not put these limitations on ourselves, even though the government has these limitations. But we got to be wise in the way we do it. And not that the churches are not doing it. They're using different means of doing it, whether through satellite, internet, podcasts, and to reach out to people in where it's illegal to be a Christian, period.
Right.
So there's different things that they're doing, but I think for the average Christian in the Middle East to have that evangelism mindset, I'd say to bring to the U.S. is probably that, just the absolute focus and resiliency when it comes to hardship, and that our view of hardship is very different in the U.S. than it is back home.
Right.
And that we can still rely on God. We can still be completely surrendered. We can still be sold out for God, even when we have all these options, and we shouldn't be distracted.
Yeah.
I would bring that for sure.
That's awesome. In talking to Mufid and Jesse, one thing that stood out to me is they talk a lot more about God than the average Christian in the U.S. I mean, just the word God, Jesus, spiritual words, not religious mumbo jumbo, but just bringing God into the conversation comes. I just was like, man, these people really talk about God a lot, and it was surprising to me because you just don't.
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen. Even in a church setting here in the States, you don't see that. And I thought, these people are living with God in very close proximity. And it was really cool. I mean, it was a great feeling because it wasn't contrived. It wasn't for show. I could just tell that's their experience. They're thinking about God, and at the time they're talking about that big bomb that went off in the harbor there in Beirut, and just crazy stuff that's going on. But it is inspiring what they've been doing there in the online outreach, and I was like, wow, it's really inspiring. But I could also see how if you're restricted and you say you cannot convert Muslims, pretty soon your mind goes, well, I can't do it legally, so I'm not going to try to do it. I'm just going to I don't have to do it. I've been basically, it's kind of like, I know God says to do it, but the government says I can't, so I'm not going to try anymore.
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking
Absolutely.
about?
Yes. And that's part of why I wanted to move, is because I was stuck in that mentality. I was stuck in that, like I felt restricted. I didn't want to be restricted. And I felt like I needed to be able to find a new path outside of my comfort zone. And we can be comfortable in both ways. I mean, we can be comfortable in the Middle East. We can make ourselves comfortable, or we can be comfortable in the U.S.
Right.
And I think it's just a matter of like taking these steps to step out of our comfort and really focus on God.
Right. I mean, really the only thing common between those two places is the climate. The Middle Eastern climate in Southern California is almost identical to the Middle Eastern climate. If you could just look into a crystal ball, where do you imagine yourself in 5 years?
Yeah. Like I said, I could see myself live anywhere. If God calls me to a place, or things happen that don't work out, I could live. I could feel like I could live anywhere. I think right now my goal is just to transfer that faith to the youth and family ministry. We love being the youth and family ministry as of right now. I think if we would look at a crystal ball, probably, I think being in San Diego, I think there's still a lot of work to be done in the youth and family in San Diego. But I also can see us moving somewhere, being called to somewhere else. And I'm completely okay with that, wherever God puts us. So right now, I'm just having that missionary mindset in San Diego, especially San Diego. I mean, if you're talking about comfort and people, enjoying where they're at and just being happy where they're at, it's San Diego. And so,
San Diego is definitely my happy place. It's like my favorite place in the continental U.S. I mean, just in terms of the weather, the ocean, the surfing, it doesn't get anything better. Only improvement I can make is maybe Hawaii, but that's, I can't drive there. So.
Yeah. Yeah. But, we're planning a trip to the Middle East, to Lebanon this summer. And I'm trying to get as many people with me to go to Lebanon from San Diego. It's part of just getting people outside their comfort zone. And the first response is like, well, is it safe? Is it good? Well, probably not safe, but you got brothers and sisters that live there.
Right. That's right.
And you've been supporting for years.
Right.
And so I want you guys to step out and see that. And so I just want to be an advocate for that. I want people to come with me. I want to be an advocate of just focusing on God. God is with us. We can trust God. We can surrender our, put down our comfortability and be disciples of Jesus.
What are you doing to make sure you don't become soft spiritually and choose option C for your level of Christianity from, passionate disciple to just a spectator?
No, absolutely. That's a great question, right? Because that's what I'm talking about, right? Bringing people outside. And I think it's, I talked to Joe Slip about this. Joe Slip talks to me about it, and he really dug Lovegren, and just keeping me accountable and keeping others accountable is just our personal evangelism.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to, especially in the youth and family, to just have your disciples or have your kids that come every Sunday, and I don't have to go out there and evangelize or cold contact or share my faith. They're already here, and I can get comfortable and just, this is my harvest. But I think really every day focusing on my personal evangelism. So I have a community college right by here. Even though I'm a youth and family minister on paper, we started a Bible talk on campus. That's not my role. It's not my job, but I go there every day, and we study the Bible with people, and we have Bible talks. And a lot of my teens graduate and go to that community college, so it feels like it's part of it. And then I help them grow out of themselves and to be able to share their faith and love God and through that stage as well. That way, when they do go to a 4-year, they're better prepared to just share their faith and be ready to study the Bible and disciple people. And so I think the biggest thing is personal evangelism,
right.
And not just relying on others to bring the harvest,
Yep.
but you going out there and bringing it yourself.
Absolutely. That's a great idea and a great plan, because you could just view it as, hey, this is my job, to be a minister, and still not be passionate about what you're trying to do. And what you're saying is that you, beyond your job, you've got a personal passion to reach those who are lost. I think that's incredible. What advice would you give to those who want to make this life count?
Yeah, I talked about this at the Pacific Southwest conference, and this idea of 2 Corinthians 5, that our bodies are tents, and that our home and lives here on earth is just a tent. And a tent is just, think of a tent. It's just a temporary structure. It's built to be put and taken down very easily. And a tent is uncomfortable. Like, it's just not, you're not going to get comfortable in a tent. And you don't have to do much, and it breaks easily. And too many times we forget that we are living in a tent. Our bodies is tents. Our homes here on earth is a tent. What we build is a tent. And a lot of times we forget that, and we try to make our tents, our homes, our lives very comfortable and nice. And we can compare tents, and this tent is nicer, this life is nicer. But at the end of the day, no matter how comfortable you make it, it's still going to be a tent. It's temporary. And we have to remember that we have a building from God, an eternal house. And that's what we need to focus on. And that's what we need to hang on. And so once we lose sight of heaven, we start making our tents comfortable, and we don't make our life count because we're just trying to make it comfortable. But if we want to make it count, we got to realize that this is just a tent. This is very temporary. It breaks easily. It's meant to be put and taken away very quickly.
Yeah.
And our home is in heaven. We have an eternal dwelling. If we understand that, we can make our life count.
Wow. That's awesome. Especially considering your personal experience with your father. You lived through that. So it comes from a person who's experienced it personally. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for talking to me, Fadi. Really am inspired. I remember hearing your talk at the Pacific Southwest, and I was inspired by it. And so thank you very much for being with me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Rob. It's been a pleasure. Grateful.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening. Here's how you can help support the program. First, let your friends know about it. Secondly, read and review one of my books. either How to Plant and Grow a Church or Courage, How to Make This Life Count. You can find them on Amazon.com. Finally, support the program with a gift today. This is a labor of love, and the link is in my show notes. I'd love your support because my goal is to inspire you to make this life count, live a no-regrets life, and multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. Have a great day and make this life count.